Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of the Becoming Immune Confident podcast. It's Dr. Kara here, and I am thrilled to welcome our guest for this week. I have been wanting to connect with Dr. Linda Bluestein for some time, and we finally were able to connect. She is board certified in anesthesia and integrative pain medicine physician. She is dedicated to alleviating the burden of hypermobility disorders. With a background in ballet, she brings a unique perspective to her practice. As the founder and host of the popular podcast, Bendy Bodies with Hypermobility MD, Dr. Bluestein provides invaluable insights and support to individuals grappling with hypermobility disorders. Her expertise is widely recognized, evidenced by her contributions to key publications, including 2 chapters in the influential book, Disjointed: Navigating the Diagnosis and Management of Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome and Hypermobility Spectrum Disorders. Dr. Bluestein serves on the Allergy and Immunology Working Group for the International Consortium on EDS and HSD, the Medical Advisory Board for Standing Up to POTS, the Board of Directors for the Bridge Dance Project, the Resources Committee for the Dance Healthy Alliance of Canada, and the Pain Management Committee Chair for the nonprofit EDS Research Foundation. She also serves on the advisory board for the Doctors for Dancers. For more information about Dr. Bluestein's work, you can visit her website at www.hypermobilitymd.com, and we will have it linked in the show notes. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I've been wanting to chat with you for a long time.
Oh, I would love to hear how you ended up doing what you're doing. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I grew up a highly allergic kid, actually. I, as an infant, had terrible asthma and, all kinds of allergies, and then migraines and eczema and all kinds of other gastrointestinal problems and things like that. But, made it all the way through my medical school training. I did want to be a professional ballet dancer, but because of my own joint pain, and I kept getting injured and my injuries weren't healing properly, so I had to take plan B, which was to go into medicine, and practiced as an anesthesiologist for over 20 years when my health kind of caught up to me again. And I had to make a different shift. I ended up actually writing an article about pain management in people with symptomatic joint hypermobility. And that kind of led me into actually finding ways to help myself feel better, and then ended up opening a practice and treating people, and then starting the podcast as a way to provide free information to people who, cannot afford to come see me or don't have the ability to travel to come see me.
That is incredible. And as you kind of think back, where along the way did you realize that your health was not, quote unquote, a normal experience?
Yeah, that is a great question, because as a kid, I didn't realize that other people didn't deal with a lot of the things that I was dealing with. Although I remember my allergies being so bad, like I wanted to die. Yeah. I mean, I was so miserable. And of course, I'm old enough that we had first generation antihistamines. We did not have second generation. So I had the choice of either being incredibly sedated and not sneezing my head off, or being just like out. I did have immunotherapy when I was a teenager, and that made a huge difference. So after that, my allergies actually got a lot better. And my asthma, when I was pregnant, my asthma got worse and then better. And then, and I had postpartum thyroiditis, and I had all these autoimmune. Yeah. So I had all kinds of things, but I think it was really not until later that I started to think, does not seem like this is normal. And I know for a fact that I was, it would probably be around 2010 that I said to my PCP, something is wrong with me. Like, I do not feel like I heal like a normal person. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you're fine. So I have had a lot of frustrating experiences that, of course, our patients have had as well, where, they go in to see people and they say, oh, no, this is in your head, or everything's okay, and it's hard. It's really, really hard when you know that your body is not functioning as well as it could.
Yeah. And I look back in my own story of like times where I was kind of gaslighting myself. Of like, oh, this
Yes.
must be normal, right? And then you're like, oh, actually, no, it's not. And yet here we are on the other side. Can you talk with us about, kind of what is hypermobility?
So hypermobility in and of itself just means that a joint or a group of joints has greater than expected range of motion. So that's literally all it means. So you could take what we use what's called a goniometer. And if anyone's ever been to physical therapy, they've probably seen these plastic device. I wish I had one. Like I need to have one right here on my desk to show you. We'd use that to measure because like up to 10 degrees of extension in like the elbow and the knee is considered normal for an adult. Now, we know kids are more flexible than adults. So the norms for range of motion vary depending on the joint and depending on the age. So it's very important to take all of that into consideration when we're looking to see, is this person hypermobile or not? And there's different types of hypermobility. So you could be hypermobile in just your hands and feet, and that's called peripheral joint hypermobility. If you're hypermobile in, let's say, just your hips or your hips and your shoulders, that's called localized joint hypermobility. Generalized joint hypermobility is when you have joint hypermobility in your core and your limbs. So you have it in a number of joints. It doesn't have to be every joint, but you have it in quite a few joints. And then historical joint hypermobility, that's what I have. It's when you were hypermobile in the past, but you're not anymore. So, I mean, I guess I do still have some joints that are hypermobile, but I'm 58 years old. So I've had a lot of surgeries, a lot of surgeries. So those joints have generally become a lot stiffer. And so we have to also consider those different types. The important thing to know is that there are genetic and non-genetic causes of joint hypermobility. There's a lot of different reasons why someone could be hypermobile. But one of the really, really important ones to be aware of are the Ehlers-Danlos Syndromes. And that's a group of disorders. There's actually 14 different recognized types, one of which is, we think, probably quite common. There's two that are fairly rare, or rare, I should say, and then the rest are like ultra, ultra rare. So those are hereditary disorders of connective tissue. And if we think about our connective tissue, right, that's present all throughout our body. So that can impact how everything in our body feels and functions.
We were just talking before I hit record about how we're recording this, about a week out from the national big allergy meeting. And one of the big topics of discussion and the theme of the meeting was the interaction between the nervous system and the immune system. But in particular, that conversation was surrounding the fact that these cells are in close proximity to one another within the connective tissue, and trying to better understand what those relationships are and, on a normal basis, but then also trying to understand what, connective tissue disorders and hypermobility may mean for these interactions too.
Yeah. I'm actually really, really happy to hear that was a topic at this meeting.
Yeah. I think what I walked away with though, going to I kind of had starred some of those sessions because of my particular interest. I think we are still at a point though, where you go to those sessions and you maybe get like a little hint of an answer, but then you walk away with like 10 more questions in its place of like, okay, well, maybe we don't see a correlation between, for instance, a condition called hereditary alpha tryptophanemia and POTS and hypermobility. Okay, well, that's okay. Sure. But what else?
Yeah. And it's really, really, really hard because, people are suffering. They are really, really suffering and they're struggling to get answers. And our conventional medical system is so poorly designed to help people with chronic, complex problems. We're pretty good in the US, especially at dealing with acute problems. We're pretty good at that. We are not good at the chronic problems that a lot of us, have difficulty wrapping our brains around. I did it first with the mast cell activation syndrome. It's like, what is this? And the lab testing is particularly challenging because we know that tryptase especially is very thermolabile. So it's really, really hard to get confirmatory results. And I tell patients all the time, when the results come back negative, for me, it just means we didn't capture anything helpful.
Yeah.
It doesn't rule anything out. It just didn't rule anything in.
Yeah. I think we have a similar conversation, and, increasingly I'm like, okay, this is just helping us frame what bucket we think, or kind of what category we think that your condition is, falling in line to, like if your baseline tryptase isn't super high, then I'm much less worried about mastocytosis. It's great.
Right.
And if you are responding to medications, awesome. I'm glad we're making headway. The reality is that our current guidelines and diagnostic criteria don't account for all of the people that we're seeing and the lived experiences of those folks, which is hard.
Right. And that's why I was one of the co-authors on the Consensus 2 paper with Dr. Lawrence Afranet. If you would be willing to link that in the show notes, I think that would be fabulous. So people can see that, because that's basically what we said in this paper, is following this really, really restrictive guideline of, the tryptase being elevated by, the 20%. What is it again? It's a double plus 20%.
There's actually a website you can go to plug in the numbers to do the calculation for you.
Okay. But it's it's so unusual that you capture that. And people ask me all the time, I'll give them a lab slip to go in when they're in a flare state to get their tryptase checked with just a tryptase on it. And they're like, how do I know when I'm in a flare? Because I feel like I'm always in a flare. Yeah. It's really hard when they are so polysymptomatic. It's so hard to make those connections between maybe things in their environment or things that they're eating or things that they're exposed to, because they're just always experiencing such a range of miserable symptoms.
Yeah. The other thing that I think I am still learning to navigate with my patients too, the line is really blurry when it comes to symptoms that you may attribute to mast cells and their physiology, and maybe dysautonomia too. There's a lot of overlap. It seems that most folks likely have both going on. And, in what ways do we then kind of do our next steps with trials of treatment? And it's hard because there is no one size fits all solution for any, for this group of folks. Everyone is very unique.
Right. At the same time, though, there is some low-hanging fruit. So it's great that you do this podcast, and so that people can be aware of what all they can potentially do on their own. And, as you're saying that, I think right before you hit record, you mentioned something about Venn diagrams with autoimmune conditions. Yeah. And it's really interesting because I think exactly what you just said. You can take EDS, dysautonomia, and MCAS, Venn diagrams of overlapping symptoms, and you're going to get a lot in that overlapping area. So it makes it very, very difficult to sort out what's coming from what. But if you think about it, when the mast cells degranulate, right, they cause the vasculature to be more permeable, and that can contribute to dysautonomia. So the connections are just all over the place.
Yeah, it's like it's a web rather than, a cause and effect.
Right.
And then we add in the microbiome, which is the other piece, of how that comes into play into all of this. And there was a talk by Dr. Laura Pace, who's a neurogastroenterologist, who's doing some phenomenal work, but looking at, some of these localized immune reactions in the gut too, that frankly, most of us, vast majority of us, don't have access to kind of some of those capabilities yet to fully explore. One moment, extra optimistic and excited, and the other, okay already, frustrated and impatient. Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit more, though, about some of those low-hanging fruit, especially with the hypermobility, but maybe have some overlap with these other conditions too.
Sure. So my practice is focused on pain management, although I do address a lot of other symptoms as well. So a lot of the things that I like to use are incorporated into an acronym that I actually, my husband, who is also a physician, kind of helped me come up with this acronym. Awesome. So it's men's PMMS. And the letters stand for movement, education, nutrition, sleep, psychosocial, modalities, medications, and supplements. And if you notice, there's 3 M's. The first M is movement. because that is the most important part. And then the last M is medications. Medications are very, very important. But a lot of times what happens is when we hurt so much, we move less and less and less. This happened to me, by the way. This happened to me around that 2010. Oh, you too, really? Yeah.
I'm not hypermobile, but with my Sjogren's. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so then when you end up like on the sofa for a month at a time, which is basically what I was doing, then you end up getting actually more sensitivity to the pain signals in your body. And it really contributes to dysfunctional fascia and, musculature and neuromuscular patterning. And it's really, you start getting more deconditioned, which of course contributes to dysautonomia. And so moving the right amount and in the right way is just crucially important. So a lot of my podcast episodes are surrounded by movement type topics. So I've talked to a lot of physical therapists, Pilates instructors, athletic trainers, et cetera, on my podcast to give different ideas of ways that people can incorporate more movement in their life in a safe way or in a way that is going to be most effective. Because I think what happens a lot of times, I hear this, and I imagine you do when you're talking to patients as well, they'll tell you, I used to be a triathlete. I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. And so they kind of have this like all or nothing mindset. And I had that. Like I didn't realize moving some is better than not moving at all. And moving some plus is even better yet. I mean, we are designed to move. So that's really important. The E stands for neuroscience education. So specifically understanding the neuroscience of pain and pain transmission. I think it was really huge for me when I understood that pain does not equal damage in the setting of chronic pain. Because in an acute situation, like, it makes more sense. It's a more straightforward problem. But when you've been in pain for a long time, things can hurt a lot, but there's a lot of other variables that are at play. And we know that actually the mast cells, believe it or not, contribute to this tremendously. They contribute to sensitization of the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. So by getting the mast cells under better control, we can really help with our pain. And of course, mast cells are inflammatory. Yeah. So, we need them. They're essential for life, right? So I don't want anyone to go thinking, I'm going to find someone that can remove my mast cells.
Heaven forbid we run into a parasite. We want them there.
Exactly. But it's really important to realize that there's psychologic factors associated with chronic pain. And it's physiologic, it's not psychiatric, but there are things that we can do to help with that. So I was catastrophizing a lot. I'm very good at catastrophizing, believing that the worst thing is going to happen. Yeah. And when I found out that was making my pain worse, I realized, okay, by just changing what I'm thinking, I can probably help myself feel a little bit better. I'm not going to 100% cure things, but I can help myself feel a little bit better. So I think that's a really, really important piece. And then the nutrition, of course, we don't have time to go into all the incredible nutritional biochemistry things, but I talk about this a lot on my podcast also, because everything that we eat influences the chemistry in our body. So we want to make sure that we are fueling our body the proper way. And then the S, that first S stands for sleep. So people talk about painsomnia. Such a huge problem. So we are in pain, so we don't sleep well. And then that makes our pain worse. And then that makes us sleep less well. So that turns into this vicious cycle that is just really, really hard to break. So if we can get people sleeping better, that alone can help with their pain. Mm-hmm. So we want to address, do they have sleep apnea? Because we know that people that have hypermobility are at increased risk of sleep apnea. Their tissues are more floppy, so their airway can collapse even if they are, normal body size. So we want to assess for those kinds of things. And then the P stands for psychosocial, which is, addressing, are you having anxiety, depression, PTSD? A lot of people have had trauma. And that basically primes the nervous system for the processing of pain signals and tying more into that emotional center for pain in a way that's not helpful. And so it's important to address those things as well. And I tell people all the time, you deserve to have a counselor or a therapist. It's not punishment. You deserve this. Yeah. The next M stands for modalities. So that might be using a TENS unit and some people might be like, TENS, I tried that. it's having the right set of expectations. I think a lot of times people use these modalities and they think that I did this. It is going to be the thing to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. No. We are looking. Yes, exactly. We are looking for a bunch of things that are each going to make 10% difference. And then we add in the tincture of time and the changes that can reverse in the nervous system. And eventually we can make some improvement. So modalities, it could also include bracing. I was showing you a brace before we started. Like things like that can be very, very helpful. And then the next stands for medications. A lot of people have, of course, tried a lot of medications by the time they get to me. And I'm sure by the time they get to you, right? And they will have tried them for their allergy problems and their MCAS. So it's looking to see, well, what have they tried? What have they not tried? Mm-hmm. We have very few medications that are specifically for pain control. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is we borrow from other conditions. Yeah. So we use a lot of things off-label, of course. So there's a lot of different things that we can use on medications. And then supplements, there's a lot of supplements that can be helpful. And we know a lot of people, for example, are deficient in vitamin D, yes, and a lot of people are deficient in magnesium. Mm-hmm. So there's a few easy things that we can do to score some quick wins. And that's kind of how I approach it. And at every visit, I think through that mnemonic and I think, okay, what area can we take some action that maybe is going to lead to some improvement?
Yeah. I mean, just as you were going through that list, I'm thinking through my own, kind of journeys with stiffness and pain, and absolutely and that's been my lived experience, 10% here, 10% there. And it really does add up over time. It's like, the idea from Atomic Habits where you adjust the plane's trajectory by 1%. And then over time, you end up in, San Francisco as opposed to Los Angeles.
Right.
Yeah, it really is. It's huge. And for me, vitamin D, sleep, stress levels, learning kind of with the tools from therapy and coaching, goodness, all those things, they really do. One of the other areas that I'm interested to learn a little more about is, you've mentioned that EDS is, this big group of conditions and, focusing a little bit more on hypermobile EDS and kind of where we're at in this idea of kind of the phenotype versus maybe genotype. And yeah, because it's not an easy diagnosis for a lot of folks to officially get.
Yeah. And I think it's really, really important for patients to understand that while you get very little time in a conventional medical setting with your doctor, at the same time, you don't want to go in and say, I think I have X, and specifically want them only to address X, because otherwise you might be missing Y. You might be missing a different condition. So the phenotype of hypermobile EDS is the triad that we see in all the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, which is the hypermobile joints. We see hyperextensible skin, and then we also see weak tissues. So there's a whole set of complicated criteria that we won't go into, but that's kind of the three things that we look for in those Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. And with hypermobile EDS, we see subluxations and dislocations. So we see joint alignment problems. We see tendinopathies or tendinosis. We see frequent injury and difficulty with healing. We see a lot of gastrointestinal problems. We see definitely MCAS, dysautonomia, a whole range of things. And that's what we call the phenotype. The genotype, we don't know what the actual genes are that cause hypermobile EDS, but I think that probably a lot of people that fit that phenotype of hypermobile EDS, probably a fair number of them have hypermobile EDS, but then there's going to be people that have other conditions. There's going to be a large percentage of people that later are explained by some other thing that get figured out along the way. I think it's really, really important not to be either settling on a diagnosis too soon and or stopping the diagnostic journey when perhaps there's another explanation. I'm sure this has happened to you where, somebody will come in for an evaluation and that they think that that's what they have as hypermobile EDS. And I'm like, you fit a lot of the criteria. But I'm thinking of this one gentleman who used to be a construction worker. So very, very physically active, up on roofs and things like that. And now he can't walk across a room. And he had profound muscle weakness and profound muscle loss. And I'm like, there's something else going on here. Like you need to see a neurologist. Like this is neurologic. So it's very important not to blame everything on a condition that you think that you have. So it's really hard because in some ways I feel kind of responsible I want to spread the word about these conditions. But at the same time, the diagnostic process is so, so important. And it's easy to have confirmation bias, right? We look at a list of things and we're like, I have this, I have this, I have this, and this is what I have. But we don't understand maybe the things that are more specific to those conditions and the things that are more common in the population and therefore could be associated with anything.
I'm thinking of two diagnoses that I see where we actually have kind of a little bit of the opposite problem kind of happening too, but overlapping. So hereditary alpha-tryptosemia, it's a problem where people have extra copies of tryptase. And so they have elevated levels of this marker in their blood, which is something we may figure out when we're assessing them for mast cell disorders. Turns out about 6% of the population actually has this genetic quirk. And we know that not everyone who has this genetic quirk is actually symptomatic. So the worry is that maybe, some symptoms are being blamed on that are being overlooked for things like dysautonomia or other, underlying or overlapping conditions that may have other treatment options that aren't being offered. They're being attributed to the hat, and maybe that's not the best idea.
Very, very similar thing. And I definitely test people for HAT also. And it's very interesting to see how some people can be highly symptomatic and you really think that they're going to be positive and they're not. And of course, the converse could be true. And there was a recent paper published saying that it doesn't necessarily correlate with symptomatology. So,
we learn something new, and then we have a bunch more questions that come about with that realization or that new paper or assertion. And I think we are in for a wild ride over the next, 15 years or so with all the research that's ongoing. At times I feel frustrated, but I'm also hopeful. It sounds like some other kind of meds in the early pipeline that are looking at, other aspects to these mast cells and nerves and connective tissues all kind of come together.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That's so, so important.
Anything exciting kind of that you're aware of within the hypermobility EDS world that
I'm super excited about?
Like that's kind of coming up or...
I agree that there's more and more people that are, I think, getting interested in this space.
Yeah.
I think probably a really important thing for patients to be aware of is to really check out very carefully the person's credentials that you are thinking of going to. And, I feel like it's great that we're getting more awareness, but at the same time, I see this happening more and more where people slap the word hypermobility on their website as a way of making it more appealing to the population. But really look to see if they say that they specialize in 50 different things and one of those happens to be hypermobility, that's really important. Also looking to see if they talk about cures. We don't have those yet. So if they're talking about cures or, things that if it sounds too good to be true, probably is. It's not 100%, but it probably is. So just be a really, really knowledgeable consumer and just try to learn as much as you can. Try to really read journal articles from reputable journals because now you can, there's the whole pay to publish thing as well, which is really, really frustrating. But at the same time, sometimes you have to do that. I mean, I published an article on the surgical and anesthesia considerations for people with EDS with Dr. Pradeep Chopra. And of course, we spent, I don't know how many hours writing this article. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is going to go in the New England Journal of Medicine. They're going to love to talk about this. I'm thinking this is going to be amazing, right? We couldn't get it. I mean, he tried so many different journals and they, kept rejecting him. And of course, every time you submit it to a different journal, you have to change the formatting to match what they want.
In the butt.
Yeah, it's a huge pain in the butt. So you spend all this work, all this time, and then encounter all these barriers. So finally, he found a journal and he was like, okay, if we pay, we'll be able to get this in this journal. And that's what we did. It's not that necessarily if you've paid to publish something that it automatically makes it bad, because of course now there's the whole like open access issue. So, things cost money, as we were talking about before. So it costs money to publish these articles. So yeah, it's kind of feels like a little bit of a scam for the writer, because you're doing the work and then you're paying to get it published. And then of course the company is getting that traffic. But it's really important for people to really try to get their sources as close as possible to the people that are doing the really core work, and to just really pay attention to what else are those people doing and what is their expertise and what is their training. Because sometimes I think it's hard to find that information online.
Absolutely. And we saw this a ton, during the pandemic, where everyone was an immune system expert, and you're just like,
Right.
I think that is really helpful. And, one of the things that I always see too is, it is helpful to ask questions, to kind of follow the money to some degree too, and not to say that, exchange of money or there are many instances where we do need to go outside of insurance, especially with chronic conditions. I think it's always helpful though to ask. I advocate for transparency. And I think that, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So, and just kind of saying, hey, I have these relationships. These may influence our conversations. And at least it's out there. I think that's one of my biggest frustrations at times, with kind of some of the folks that are out there that are kind of the self-proclaimed experts of selling these magic cure type situations that they're benefiting significantly off of.
Mm-hmm.
It's all shades of gray.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And for some, it become very commercialized.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. I have learned so much, and I'm going to go back and listen and write down that acronym, because I think that I might have a little bit of tweaking kind of from the allergy, immunology kind of lens of things, and it's so fun. I'm just so thankful for your time, your expertise, the work you're doing in this area. And I'd love for you to share, a couple places where people can find you. We're going to make sure to put all of your links in the show notes, along with those guidelines as well. But where can people connect, and where can they listen to you too?
Sure. So the website for the podcast is bendybodiespodcast.com. And from there, they can access the YouTube channel. They can access the podcast on numerous different podcast players. They can also look by category, so they can see if they're interested in particular topics. I do, because I was a former ballet dancer, I do have some dance-related topics. I have, of course, mast cell episodes. So the categories, I'm still working on categorizing like some of the middle episodes, but they can access it there. And then my website is hypermobilitymd.com. And I am very active on social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all at hypermobilitymd. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at bendy_bodies on Instagram, and then Bendy Bodies Podcast on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. It was so great to chat with you.
I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to future conversations.
Me too.
Take care.
You too.
If you are loving this mix of self-discovery and science found here on the Becoming Immune Confident podcast, I'd love to invite you to sign up for my email list. Hop over to drkarawada.com and hit subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on any insights into new immune system science or how we can harness healing through our daily habits. Are you ready to feel confident, energized, and more like that BA that you used to be? Here's how we can work together. Jennifer, an autoimmune dietitian, and I, board-certified immunologist, have put together the one and only Becoming Immune Confident comprehensive course, coaching, and community membership. What we do is we help women with misbehaving immune systems reclaim control over their health while minimizing fatigue, fog, and pain, all caused from too much inflammation. So if you are ready to have confidence and clarity around your immune system health, and a sense of certainty knowing that you are doing the best for your health and the health of your family, hop over to immuneconfident.com for details on how we can work together. We can't wait to connect. Hey there, amazing listeners. Before we wrap up today's episode, I want to take a quick moment to ask for your support. If you're enjoying the content of the Becoming Immune Confident podcast we're bringing you week after week, there's a simple but incredibly impactful way you can show your appreciation. You see, leaving a review is like giving us a virtual high five, and it helps our podcast reach even more people who could benefit from the valuable insights, entertainment, and inspiration we strive to provide week after week. So if you're finding value in what you hear, here's what you can do. Open up your podcast app, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform, and give us a glowing 5-star review. We're dedicated to bringing you the best, and your feedback helps us fine-tune our content to suit your interests and needs. But hey, don't stop there. If you have a moment, leaving a few kind words in the review section goes a long way too. Share what you love about the podcast, your favorite episodes, or how it's made a positive impact on your life. Your words not only brighten our day, but they also encourage others to join our incredible community. Remember, every 5-star review and every word of encouragement counts. It's like fuel to keep us creating, innovating, and striving to make your listening experience even better. So if you're up for it, show us some love by leaving us that virtual high five in the form of a 5-star review today. And a huge shout out to all of you who have already taken the time to do so. You rock. Thank you for being a part of our podcast journey, and we can't wait to keep bringing you more amazing episodes in the future. Until next time, keep shining and keep listening and keep on building that confidence in yourself and your immune system health. Take care.